Chapter 81, You Can't Give Me What I Want. He didn't want to break up, but that wasn't his choice to make. Forcing a smile on her lips, Jianyun blinked rapidly as she desperately tried to hold the tears back. Sometimes, even time couldn't heal the pains of her past, and all she could do now was move a step forward and look into the future. Perhaps, that was her only distraction from it happening in the present. The day he betrayed me was the day everything was over between us. What I want is stability and loyalty, things that I know you won't be able to give. I can't know. I don't want to get hurt again. What if I can give that to you? Huo Liancheng tightened his grip on her shoulders. What if I promise that I'll never hurt you like he did? She laughed bitterly. Then I don't want it either. Why? Don't you understand? Jianyun looked up at him. Her eyes were watery, and the tip of her nose was tinged red. With a shake of her head, she removed herself from his hold and walked directly towards the sofa, not wanting to stare at him any longer. The last thing I'll trust is man's promise, especially yours. He could only stare helplessly at her retreating back, clenching and unclenching his fists. His heart stirred in protest, but there was nothing else he could do. Do you really trust Attorney Zhao that much then? Do you think he can give you what you want, what you need? She paused. Although Zhou Xiaolong and she had called it quits the day before yesterday, it was a fact that she had kept to herself and her friends. Back at the car, Jianyun had wanted to tell Huo Liancheng, but after the way he had worded his sentences then, she chose not to. Besides, it was better for him to think like this. Maybe he'd back off once he realized the numerous obstacles surrounding his path. Maybe then, she'd finally be alone. However, that thought left a weird feeling in her chest. Huo Liancheng was charming, and almost every woman was attracted to him. Who wouldn't? But it was precisely because of this that she didn't want to fall for him, not wanting to step into a trap she had so carelessly stepped into a few years ago. The pain she had felt, it was agonizing and heartbreaking, and she refused to go through the same pain ever again. If she had fallen for him, maybe this time there would be no recuperating from the fall. This was why she had chosen to find someone she didn't love to marry. At least if she didn't have any expectations, there wouldn't be any risk of getting hurt. It was only then she could live a peaceful life, a painless life, and it was one that she had aspired to from the very beginning. With a sigh, Jianyun turned away, wanting to calm herself down. I'm going to the bathroom. You're evading from me again. Sighing reluctantly, Huo Liancheng pointed her the way. She stuck her tongue out but didn't bother to say anything more. Walking into the bathroom, she closed the door behind her and glanced around. There was nothing on the sink except for a bottle of hand wash. It was obvious that the restroom was prepared for his guests. With a sigh, she dipped her hands under the cool liquid as she thought of the events that had just transpired. Jianyun smiled bitterly, staring into her reflection. The woman in front of her was far from the exciting youth she used to be. Gone were the years when it was so easy to laugh and grin as if there was nothing wrong. Now that she had a taste of reality, there was no going back from there. It had been 6 years already, and she didn't think that it was possible to see Shu Haiyan again. After spatting out on how she hated him so much, she didn't have the courage to face him after everything they had been through. What was she so afraid of? She didn't know how long she had stayed in the bathroom until Huo Liancheng knocked on the door. Have you fallen into the toilet bowl? What's taking so long? What? Jianyun blinked, snapping out of her reverie. Someone's calling you. Don't bother answering it. Thinking that it was Shu Haiyan who had called her, her fingers gripped the sink below her. There was no way she was falling into his trap again. No way in hell. Just then, a thought had occurred to her. Wait, do you mind checking to see who called? If it was her mother who called, then the old woman would be worried sick if she didn't answer. Not long after, his voice rang out. Luo Yanyan, and there's another video call from Wu Wenjing. Do you want me to pick it up? Wait, I'll take it. Jianyun was about to turn around and step out of the bathroom when a sudden chill ran through her body. With a cry of surprise, she jumped back and glanced down to see that she had forgotten to turn off the tap while she was washing her hands. The water was already overflowing around the basin, splashing against her chest as it quickly drenched her pants. Fuck. The sink had been manufactured to fit Huo Liancheng's tall height, so before she could stop it, her shirt and pants were already drenched. Hurriedly, Jianyun twisted the faucet shut, breathing a sigh of frustration. Are you taking a bath? His voice held a twinge of incredulity as he heard the sound of splashing water from the other end of the door. I may have forgotten to close the faucet, and now my clothes are all wet. Jianyun opened the door as she gazed at the floor, not wanting to even look at him. At this point, she had lost all face in front of him. Not only had she continuously embarrassed herself whenever he was around, but he always had front-row seats to witness the shame she had felt. She had initially thought that he'd say something mock her right on the spot. After all, Huo Liancheng had always been like this, but all she had heard was a hushed silence. In fact, it was so silent that she could hear a pin drop from a mile away. Not being able to help herself, she looked up to see what he was doing, only to see him staring at her in awe. What are you looking at? She furrowed her eyebrows following his gaze, Her eyes widened, and it was as if all the blood had rushed up to her face. Feeling warm, she ducked and covered herself. Don't look. Why hadn't she noticed that she was just wearing a white shirt and a jacket today? She had felt so hot after entering the household that she had taken off her coat, and now that the water had drenched her, her black bra was displayed. Coming back to his senses, Huo Liancheng smirked. If I didn't know you any better, I would have assumed that you were trying to lure me by doing that. I said, don't look. Jian Yun stomped her feet. Quickly folding her arms, she glared at him even harder. If looks could kill, he would have been 7 feet under the ground at this point. Sometimes I feel like the unluckiest person alive, she thought, groaning inwardly. It seemed that her fate would forever be intertwined with him, in complete embarrassment. All right, I won't look. Holding back his laughter, he slowly turned around. Your period just ended, and you pour all this cold water onto yourself. You should take a hot bath, just so you wouldn't catch a cold. The sudden softness of his voice stunned her. In all the years of her life, she had never seen such a man so openly concerned about her period. Normally, some of the men she had met were disgusted at the thought of even mentioning it. She slowly nodded. Besides, what he said made a lot of sense. After all, wearing wet clothes could be very uncomfortable. But my clothes are wet, and I don't have anything to change into. Jian Yun wrinkled her nose as she pulled the sticky fabric from her skin. It would have made no sense if she took a bath just to wear these wet fabrics again. Wait, do you have a hairdryer I could use? There's a clothes dryer in the laundry room. It'll be dried in half an hour. With a shrug, Huo Liancheng held her hand and led her out of the living room. Wait, her eyes narrowed. Where are you taking me? Couldn't I wash there? There's no heater in that washroom. You should go inside, he responded naturally. Soon enough, the brightly lit living room was gone from her view as they walked up the grand staircase. With a slow turn, she found herself stepping into a large room. This was obviously the master's bedroom, with a large king-sized bed and silver-gray colors looming over them like a cage. It was obvious that the room was well kept. Although lifeless, there was a certain elegance carved into it, just like the living room. She blinked. Huo Liancheng motioned her into the bathroom and taught her how to turn on the heater. Before she could say anything, he crossed his arms over her chest and grinned. Do you want me to help you wash up? Her eyes suddenly widened in alertness as she immediately pushed past him, yelling, Thanks. But there's no need. Slamming the door shut, Jian Yun could hear his low laughter bouncing from the walls, and she suddenly felt the urge to bury herself into her hands. Why was she always getting into these kinds of situations? With a sigh, she looked around. The bathroom was quite large. With a shower and a jacuzzi at the other end of the room, it certainly made use of the space. There were a few toiletries on the washstand as well. Everything's so tidy, she thought. But then again, he has always been a clean freak. Taking a quick look around, she noticed that there was only one toothbrush. She was halfway out of her clothes when a knock sounded from the door. Jian Yun tensed. What's up? Chapter 82, You Big Pighead. Are you planning to come out naked after taking off your clothes? Huo Liancheng's teasing voice rang out. Jian Yun froze. He was right. If she was going to change out of her clothes and place them in the dryer, what the hell was she going to wear? The image of her walking out of there naked was enough to scar her right on the spot. Her fingers shook in apprehension. With no other choice, she slowly looked up. Do you have any clothes for me to wear? There was silence as she stood there under the artificial lights. Her toes scrunched over the furry rags. If she had been in any man's house, she'd feel wildly uncomfortable to be in such a compromising state. But there was something about being here that made her feel less uneasy. Suddenly, a knock sounded from the other side. Quickly putting on her clothes, she peeked outside and saw him handing her a white shirt. It's one of my shirts, he explained. But it would have to do. It seemed that she had no other choice but to accept it. As Jian Yun relaxed under the hot waters, it didn't take her long enough until she stepped out of the shower and grabbed a towel to dry herself. After all, although she felt a little less uneasy being around him, it wouldn't be right for her to feel at home. Besides, it wasn't as if she had known him for a long time. Such rotten luck, she mused to herself, shaking her head in self-pity. However, as she stared at her clothes, a thought occurred to her. Her bra and underwear were both still drenched, so if she wore Huo Liancheng's shirt now, it still would have been no use. This white shirt would obviously become more translucent, and Huo Liancheng had been waiting outside the bathroom this entire time when he heard a meek. Hello, what's wrong? Do you mind if I have a black shirt? Her voice was hesitant, like a mosquito's buzz that could barely be heard. If another embarrassing hiccup like this happened again, she might as well just hide in her apartment. There wouldn't be any point in going out like this anymore. Not asking away, he grabbed another shirt and knocked on her door again. The bathroom door cracked open and she slowly stretched out her hand to receive the shirt. At the sight of his snow-white arm, Huo Liancheng's eyes flashed. He slowly handed her the shirt, watching as the door slammed shut, as if all of this was a trick of the light. Blinking, he turned away. Thank you, Jian Yun said gratefully as she stepped out of the bathroom. Her face was still a bit flustered from what had happened earlier. Biting her lips, she returned the white shirt and walked back to fetch her wet clothes, to dry them in the laundry room. Hu Liancheng stared at her swaying back, and his eyes narrowed into slits. Although his shirt was big, it definitely fitted into her little frame 10 times better than it did for him. His long sleeves were folded up to reveal her thin wrists, and the hem of his shirt only reached right up to her knees, going up to her mid-thigh every time she struggled to reach for something. As she walked, the wide collar would slip down, revealing her feather-soft shoulders. She looked captivating. Jian Yun carried her clothes out, only to notice that he was staring right at her. There was a flicker of possessiveness in his eyes, and she immediately tensed. She wasn't wearing anything underneath the shirt. If he suddenly pounced on her, it would have made for a helpless sight, and no one would believe her if she told them the story. Anxiety slammed against her like an annoying wasp, and she hesitantly stepped back, not knowing what else to do. "Let's go." Fortunately, he forced himself to look away and led her into the laundry room, where he taught her how to use the dryer. Seeing her just standing there and watching her clothes, he raised his eyebrows in amusement. "What, do you plan on just waiting here for the next half hour? Could you go out first?" I still have other clothes to dry," she stuttered out, covering her flushed face. Bursting into laughter, Hu Liancheng peered at the black bra and underwear she was holding behind her back. He didn't push her anymore. Instead, he nodded and left the room, giving her more than enough time to do whatever that needed to be done. At the sight of his retreating figure, Jian Yun immediately put up her undergarments on the hanger and hung it in the dryer. Without another word, she slipped out into the room. There was no way she was going to stay here for half an hour, so the only option she had was to head right out of the laundry room. However, she couldn't help but glance at the bare shirt. Seeing as she wasn't wearing anything underneath the thin fabric, the sense of security was lost on her. Biting her lips, she tugged on his shirt, forcing it to go even lower. Furthermore, the shirt smelled of him. There was a faint musky scent that swirled all around her, making her ears go red and her heart beat even faster. Having no other choice, she slowly stepped out of the laundry room and walked into the living room. The loose fabric swayed around her legs, a constant reminder of her stature. And the thought made her face turn bright red in embarrassment. "Sit." Hu Liancheng had already seated himself on the sofa. He pressed on the central air conditioning remote to raise the temperature around the living room. Picking the farthest seat away from him, she sat down and propped her legs together. Her fingers tugged on the fabric so that she wouldn't be accidentally exposing herself in front of him. "Someone had just called you right now." Knowing that she wasn't wearing anything underneath, he was a bit distracted. He immediately diverted his attention to the phone that was sitting on the tea table. One of them was Luo Yanyan, and the other one was named Big Wave. I'd assume she was Wu Wenjing? He didn't offer anything more. Right on time, her phone rang again. Jian Yun bent over to pick it up, giving him a better view of her cleavage. His eyes swept across her chest and his hand subconsciously gripped his armrest in reluctance. She was in a hurry that she didn't even notice the quick change in his expression. It was a video call from Wu Wenjing. As soon as she had picked up, her voice echoed across the living room. "Yun, are you okay? Is something wrong? Did something happen?" Her eyebrows furrowed over, puzzled by her friend's sudden concern. "Have you seen Shu Haiyan? He begged me 2 days ago, saying that he had something important to tell you." Luo Yanyan apologized guiltily as soon as she popped into the video call. "I couldn't bear it any longer, so I gave him your number." "Giving him the number is fine, but why did you have to tell him where I live?" Jian Yun asked helplessly, rubbing her forehead. "I didn't tell him your address. I think that he assumed we were living together, so he found my address from the Qing University registrar." With a sigh, Luo Yanyan complained. "In fact, the guy had the nerve to call me right now, saying that you weren't answering his calls. He was so worried that something had happened to you that he asked me to ask you about it. That's why we were calling." "Oh shit. Yun, did you see Shu Haiyang? Did you beat him into a pulp? Beat him until his teeth were falling out?" Wu Wenjing jumped excitedly before peering into her background. "Wait, Yun, where are you? Why do I see you wearing someone else's shirt? Who the hell did you hook up with?" "Shut up." Jian Yun secretly glanced at Hu Liancheng. He was holding his cell phone this entire time and was scrolling up and down the screen. Did he listen in on their conversation? Not wanting to think about it anymore, she turned and whispered to her friends, "If that's all you have to say, you can wait for me to come back. I'll be hanging up now." "Wait, Jian Yun, why does the man look so much like President Huo? Are you at his house? Are you wearing his clothes? Did you guys finally had sex?" Wu Wenjing shot her question after question as she jumped up and down on her screen. "You did good, Yun. Not only is President Huo handsome, but he's practically loaded. You better not be stupid and reject him again." Her screams were so loud that it had echoed across the high ceilings. Jian Yun stomped her feet, glaring at the screen. "We didn't sleep together." Suddenly, she sensed that something was wrong, so she looked up. It was then when she saw that Hu Liancheng was smiling right at her. Feeling all the blood rush up to her face, she covered herself and hid from his gaze. At this point, how the hell was she going to head back to the office? Stifling a groan, she narrowed her eyes at her friend. I just saw him smile. Was I right then, Yoon? It seemed that Wu Wenjing still didn't get her point, as she continued to clamor over her. Not being able to take it anymore, Jin Yoon hung up the phone. Why the hell are we even friends? Jin Yoon thought bitterly as she squeezed her eyes shut. At this point, her friends had already humiliated her to death. Chapter 83. If you refuse, you won't have another chance. The three of you look like you go way back, Huo Liancheng commented. He knew that it wasn't the right time to tease Jun Yoon about her friend's words from the other end of the line, so he changed the topic to get to know her better. We became doormates back at the university. We weren't actually supposed to be roommates then, but one of our supposed doormates had already graduated and went abroad. Jian Yun murmured lowly. A slow smile crept to her face as she remembered the times they had together, but she still didn't remove her hands from her cheeks. Well, at least he didn't take advantage of the topic, she thought in complacency, having a better impression of him than before. He smiled, nodding. It's rare to still be close friends with your university roommates. That's quite a hard faith to come by. It is, she admitted. Her fingers grabbed the hem of her shirt as her pale feet rubbed against her slippers. There was a moment of silence before she finally stammered out, Wu Wenjing, she has an enormous mouth. Please don't mind her. She's just spouting some nonsense a few minutes ago. Which part? Huo Liancheng raised his gaze from the carpeted floor, staring at her. His eyes were like a realm of darkness, one that she found herself being dragged into every time she stared up at him. She gripped the sides of the couch as she tried to steady herself. Jun Yoon had wanted to be clear that Wu Wenjing wasn't thinking straight with her wordings, that they weren't necessarily the truth. So what else was he trying to say? You told me the last time that everyone wanted to sleep with me, and you. The smile on his face widened extensively, and there was a mischievous glimmer in the way that he had gazed at her. Although he may not tease her about the phone call, he could certainly poke fun of her on the night they've spent together. He chuckled at the sight of her stammering for words. I said that? The corner of her eyes twitched before she hurriedly shook her head in denial. That's impossible. I don't remember saying that to you. You said it that night, you forced a kiss on me. You even threw me down, he said half-truthfully, snickering. You keep on saying how good-looking I am and how much you wanted to ravish me just by looking at me. You could be quite the seductress when you want to be, you know. Don't bother talking. Jun Yoon squeaked out as she buried her face deeper into her hands, speechless at his words. She might never touch a single glass of wine ever again, especially after that horrendous episode. As long as Huo Liancheng would never let her live this down, it seemed that this situation would haunt her entire life, just biting at the very chance of relaxation. Suppressing a groan, she glanced up at him. I don't want to remember anything about that night. You got that? And why not? Putting his phone down, he stared at her in faux bitterness. His voice sounded like a child who hadn't been given a Christmas present. He crossed his arms over his chest with a pout. You forced me, but you still refused to take full responsibility for it. And now you're even banning me from talking about it like it's a crime. Can you not be so dramatic? At the sight of his cross expression, she couldn't help but laugh. Her shoulders twitched as she tried to hold herself back, but the more he glared at her, the more she couldn't control herself. It was the first time she had ever seen such an indifferent man become so childish. And you're even laughing now, he accused. His face grew even more bitter, and he placed his large palm on top of his chest. Do you know how much you've hurt me? How much you've wounded me? Stop. Not being able to control herself any longer, Jianyun threw herself onto the sofa, giggling maniacally. She didn't even notice that Huo Liancheng had suddenly seated himself right next to her. It was only when she had snapped out of her reverie did she find herself lying against the sofa with Huo Liancheng's hands stroking the sides of her cheeks. He stared down at her with so much intensity in his eyes that her heart raced in her chest at the mere sight. Her fingers shook, but she found herself unable to move. All she could do was stare up at him, mesmerized by the softness of his features. Silly girl, he teased lightly. Are you really not going to consider dating me? The tips of her ears burned. We're not suitable? If you reject me again, I wouldn't be asking you in the future. His long fingers caressed her high cheekbones. Of course, this wouldn't stop him, but it would certainly give her a chance to actually think things through. Won't you regret it? Jianyun's eyes flashed, and a blanket of silence settled upon them. She didn't know why her heart started to tremble at his words, or why her stomach had uneasily stirred inside of her, but she steadied herself. It was probably because of the cold, she told herself, looking away from his face. There was just something about Huo Liancheng that could set her entire senses up into flames. Even then, she shook her head. Trust me, I won't have any regrets. He sighed softly. The bitterness had receded from his features, and it was soon replaced with pure, unresolvable sorrow. The tension inside the living room had thickened immeasurably, and the two could only stare at each other for the future that could have been, rather than what would have been. Her breath hitched. Why do I feel so sad? She had wanted to say anything that could perhaps provide closure on both ends, but before she could even speak, Huo Liancheng had already stood up and left. At this point, she was still at a loss for words. The room that was once filled with laughter and playfulness had fallen silent. Stroking the strands of her hair that had fallen to her face, Jian Yun excused herself uneasily. I'll go check if my clothes are dry. Without another word, she hurriedly stood up and raced out of the room as if she was fleeing a prison cell. Huo Liancheng could only stare at her retreating figure, his eyes as dark as ink. When she finally walked out of the laundry room, she was already dressed in her own clothes. Handing the black shirt to him, she hesitated. About the shirt that you've borrowed me. You can put it here. Oh. Jian Yun had originally wanted to offer to take it to the dry cleaners. After all, his obsession with cleanliness and orderliness had left quite an impression on her. She had actually planned to put it in the washing machine, but knowing his preference for expensive high-maintenance clothing, there may be some fabrics that couldn't be manhandled by a machine alone. She shuffled uncomfortably. However, since he removed her help, she didn't insist any further. Well, I'll go first. Thank you for today. Staring up at her for a long time, he only nodded when her face had turned completely red. I'll drive you back. Oh, there's really no need. I can go there myself. She tried to stop him, but it was to no avail. Huo Liancheng had already grabbed his jacket and pulled her right out of the doorstep. Let's go, he said, allowing no room for refusals. As she sat in his car, Jian Yun realized why he was so insistent in giving her a ride out of the residential complex. The security around the area was truly top-notch, given the number of important residents behind the gated community. As they left the complex, she noticed that every guard station required face recognition. Those who weren't residents and who couldn't provide their identification cards might be asked to leave the premises or be held for questioning. It was obvious that she wouldn't be able to go in and out of here alone. Will you be heading home? He glanced at her as they finally left the complex. No. Hesitating, she gave him Wu Wenjing's address. Just put it in the navigation system, Huo Liancheng ordered. Since Jian Yun already had the key to her friend's house, she didn't need to call ahead of time. Instead, she leaned back against her seat and observed the flash of lights that came by every now and then. Unlike the ride going into the villa, this car ride was far more uncomfortable. He didn't say anything else along the way, nor did he give any other reaction from what she had said back at the villa. Now, all she could hear was the slow beating of her heart. She shifted uncomfortably, feeling uneasy. They had finally arrived an hour later. He stopped the car and turned to look at her. His eyes were indifferent, like the very first time they had met at the coffee shop. A shiver shot down her spine. Thank you, she whispered, gripping the straps of her bag. He nodded, not saying another word. Jian Yun had wanted to say more, but after hesitating for a moment, she shook her head and stepped out of the car. Just as she was about to take 2 steps forward towards the entrance, she suddenly turned around. About the necklace you've given me, she said, pausing. I could bring it back to you tomorrow. Huo Liancheng was about to start the car and leave, but he suddenly slammed his foot on the brakes. Turning his head, he glared at her. I've already said it before. If you don't like it, then you can just throw it away. He scowled. I'm not the type of man who asks for the things I've already given you. You got that? He spoke to her as if they were complete strangers, and she couldn't help but tighten her grip on her bag. Was this really all what they were? Without another word, he stepped on the accelerator, and the black Bentley soon disappeared into the night. Jian Yun stared blankly at the vehicle, feeling empty. What was wrong with her? Shouldn't she be happy that things had reverted back to normal? When Wu Wenjing spotted Jian Yun stepping foot into her house, her jaw dropped, but she quickly got over her surprise and jumped at her friend. She showered her with all types of questions, looking like a woman who's out for blood. What happened? Did you sleep with him? Why are you in his house? She had pestered her more and more, but Jian Yun still didn't offer any answers. Wait, is something wrong? Did something happen? Nothing. It's just, I'm so annoyed right now. Jian Yun shook her head in frustration. Now that she had finally gotten what she wanted, why didn't she feel happy? Why did the feeling suddenly grow even worse than before? Suddenly, a thought occurred to her. I want to ask you a question. If you reject a man that had been so kind to you and has always said that he likes you, do you? She paused, wanting to ask for Wu Wenjing's opinion. Who is this about? President Huo or Su Haiyang? She raised her eyebrow, nibbling on her apple. Chapter 84, Give him a chance. Doesn't matter. Jian Yun waved her hand dismissively. So suppose you reject him, and this man suddenly changes his attitude towards you, started treating you more as a stranger than as a friend, or maybe even an acquaintance. What is he thinking? Did the girl do something wrong? Or, please don't tell me you're talking about President Huo. Did you really reject him again? Is there something wrong going on in that head of yours? Immediately knowing who she was talking about, Wu Wenjing stopped what she was doing and stared at her for a long time, looking at her friend as if she had suddenly grown 2 heads. Wait, is it because of Su Haiyang then? Did he come back and give you hope? Do you still want to be in a relationship with him? Of course not. Then, let's remove him out of the picture. Didn't you say that you didn't like President Huo? Then it shouldn't matter to you if he starts acting a little cold towards you. Besides, it will be normal for him to start distancing himself given that you've rejected him a million times before this. Wu Wenjing turned serious. Do you think that he should always treat you warmly? That even if you keep rejecting him, he shouldn't have a temper and still continually chase you as if nothing had happened? It's not that. She shook her head. It's just that. You feel a little lost? Jian Yun lowered her gaze and nodded. I don't really know what to say, Yun. I mean, do you know what you've done? Wu Wenjing sighed, rubbing the creases over her forehead. She grabbed a pillow and sat beside her, trying to be as honest as possible. There was a moment of silence before she said, Right now, you're acting as hypocritical as those women on the internet. Trying to lead on those men like I don't know. Like a shepherd leading his sheep. You aren't like this, Yun. Am I really that annoying? Jian Yun groaned. Although she felt a little bit insulted by her friend's insinuation, she knew that Wu Wenjing was right. After everything she had done to Zhou Xiaolong and Huo Liancheng, she had been very hypocritical recently. Her heart stirred inside her chest as she bowed her head, refusing to look at her in the eye. Do you remember how free you were in the past? How happy you were to just go with the flow with everything that came up? Wu Wenjing sighed. Disdain flashed across her face as she sighed disappointedly. Why are you so conflicted when it comes to matters of the heart? You know what? If I were President Huo, I would have ignored you a long time ago. Kudos to him for lasting this long. As for Shu Haiyan, why don't you just give him a chance to see what he has to say? If there's a misunderstanding, then we could finally put what you feel to rest. As for whether or not you two could still be together, that's up for fate to decide, shouldn't it? Lovers can turn into enemies, and enemies can turn into friends. Sometimes our lives become a cycle of our very own choices, and you shouldn't burden yourself with the choices you've made in the past. Wu Wenjing continued. You shouldn't overthink things. If you really do love him, then maybe it's time to forget what Shu Haiyang did to you and be with him again. If not, then you shouldn't let that past define the choices you make today. Crap, when did you become so philosophical all of a sudden? Jian Yun blinked, drawing back from her words. It doesn't seem like you. What can I say? With age comes wisdom, she teased. Jian Yun burst into laughter. Right, what happened to your friend in the entertainment industry? Did you visit his company? Don't even remind me. He certainly didn't lie about the legitimacy of the company, but guess what he did lie about? Wu Wenjing rolled her eyes, exasperatedly throwing her hands up in the air. He's actually just an errand runner under that company, didn't have any connections whatsoever. And the part that he wanted to put me in? It was to be a freaking corpse. Something about a forensic film, where they required someone to strip and be dissected by the actors in the film. God, that's horrible. She shuddered at the thought of her friend lying on an operation table like a corpse. Just the mere thought of it was enough to give her nightmares. I think it's better if I work at Ming's first. When I'm thinner and less likely to blow up at producers, I'll probably participate in a beauty pageant at Hong Kong. Wu Wenjing proclaimed, taking a bite out of her apple. Leaning against the couch, she pushed her fist up in the air. Once I do that, I'll enter the entertainment circle. There's no way I could fail. That's right. Jian Yun nodded in agreement. Besides, everyone had different goals in life. While she preferred to be a wallflower, Wu Wenjing loved to rise above the rest and be the center of attention. Being a simple HR officer certainly didn't fit her taste, and she was glad to cheer her on in this journey for higher goals. Whenever the opportunity comes, it would be best to take it. Plus, it really wouldn't hurt Wu Wenjing to step out of her comfort zone and try new things. All right, don't think I've forgotten about what you did. Once she was finished eating her apple, Wu Wenjing narrowed her eyes. You idiot. You'd regret rejecting President Huo. Although Shu Haiyan's your first love, no matter how much you try to make amends, that certainly wouldn't build back the mistakes you've made. After all, you wouldn't be able to go back in time, would you? And it's not like you don't know what kind of person his mother is. If you'd reunite with him again, you're already promising yourself a harder life ahead of you. With a shake of her head, Wu Wenjing stood up and walked towards the trash can. Jian Yun fell silent. I've already said what I needed to say on this matter, and here's a piece of advice for you. You have to think even more carefully on your next move. Whether you decide to go for Shu Haiyan or not, it's best if you start letting go of all those pain you've experienced. Pouring a glass of water for Jian Yun, her eyes suddenly lit up. Suddenly she glanced at her. Wait, speaking of, you've never answered me. Did you sleep with President Huo today? No. Then why are you wearing his shirt? Do they smell good? I still remember the last time we rode together in his car. God, even his scent was enough to make me faint. Wu Wenjing pressed her hands against her chest as a yearning expression flashed across her features. Truly, just sitting beside him was a dream. What more if she got the chance to wear his shirt? God, she was going to die. Jian Yun pursed her lips. I accidentally drenched my clothes while I was washing my hands, but I didn't have any clothes to change into. That's why he offered his shirt. What a disappointment. With a sigh, Wu Wenjing shook her head in disappointment. Jian Yun, I'll be heading off to my room now. Don't be lonely without me. Wu Wenjing caressed her face before heading back to her bedroom. Rolling her eyes, Jian Yun slapped her butt. Wu Wenjing had a well-decorated, two-bedroom house. Since her grandmother had died, she had absolutely no burdens at all. Although her parents had been divorced for many years and had never tried to control her, they made sure to send her some money every year. Thus, she didn't really have many expenses to pay off herself. For many others, she was already living the prime of her life, and there were absolutely no shortages of food in her place. However, Jian Yun wasn't in the mood to explore her kitchen. Instead, she lay on the sofa and scrolled through her phone. Glancing at her WeChat, her thumb hovered over the text messages that were sent by Xu Haiyang. These were the ones he had sent back when she was still at the cinema. She read them all, one by one. Yun Dao, could you pick up my call? I have something important I need to tell you. Please pick up. What happened that year was really all just a misunderstanding. I found out that the reason Lin Lanlan was in my bed was that someone had set me up. I really didn't know anything about this. Jian Yun blinked. Immediately, she logged out of her WeChat, not wanting to take it any longer. Did Xu Haiyang really think of her as an idiot? She had already seen it with her own eyes. How could it all be fake? Even if someone had sent Lin Lanlan into his bedroom, why didn't he stop her? How the heck was he tricked into sleeping with her? Chapter 85. The Love That Is Sworn to the Death. Furthermore, when they were caught, Lin Lanlan had taken the initiative to kneel down and beg for Jian Yun's forgiveness. If Xu Haiyang didn't have anything to do about it, he would have chased after her and explained to her what had really happened. Instead, he didn't say another word. He even had the audacity to ask her why she was doing this to Lin Lanlan, as if Jian Yun was the third party in their relationship. Jian Yun could never forget the heartbreak she had experienced that night, the crippling pain that had soared through her veins and rendered her lifeless for the next following months. That night, two people had betrayed her, the two people whom she regarded as her closest companions, her childhood sweetheart and her best friend. And when she had ultimately found out about this affair, her boyfriend had even lectured her about this entire ordeal, questioning her authority as if she was just some other woman in his life. Was that his so-called undying love? All of a sudden, the memories that she had tried so hard to seal up had begun to ripple in her mind. She stared at the ceiling, gripping her phone so tightly that she thought it was going to break. Her other hand was placed on her chest, and silent tears slid down her cheeks. Although he had hurt her, Wu Wenjing was right. She had been far too preoccupied with her previous heartache to navigate her present relationships. Whenever she came across something that was even remotely related to Xu Haiyang, she'd immediately reject it and throw it to the nearest bean, unaware of how affected she was by what he had done to her. It seemed that escaping was not an option this time around. It's time that Jian Yun finally faced the barriers in her heart in order to finally set herself free from the chains of her past. Thinking of this, she immediately opened her WeChat and sent Xu Haiyang one word. Okay. It was only a few seconds after the message was sent, and her phone started to ring again. Upon seeing the string of numbers as the caller ID, her heart skipped a beat. She had suddenly felt more nervous than a few minutes ago, as her fingers hovered over the answer button. Looking closer, Jian Yun realized that this was the same number Xu Haiyang had 6 years ago. She remembered how they had chosen their own numbers when they bought a new SIM card, one of the memories they had of one another. While she had changed her number as soon as they had parted ways, it seemed that Xu Haiyang kept his. The phone rang about 5 times until she managed to pick it up. Yunduo? Xu Haiyang's voice trembled slightly. There was a tinge of excitement and anxiety tied around his words, and it was enough to catch her off guard. Call me Jian Yun. There was a moment of silence before he said, All right. Well, tell me what you want to say. She had never thought that she'd be so calm upon hearing his voice after so many years. Perhaps her hatred towards him had leveled over time, and the passion that she once felt for the man had slowly dissipated. Even then, that still didn't stop the dull ache in her chest and the quiver of her bottom lip. It's just, I can't explain it over the phone, he hesitated. Is it okay if we meet again? Afraid that she would disagree, Xu Haiyang added, I don't have any other intentions besides this. It's just that, recently discovered a few things lately regarding what had happened 6 years ago. I just need to clear things out. Fine, she answered curtly. What else could she say? Besides, if Jian Yun didn't agree to meet up with him, he would surely continue to pester her. Knowing that this was also for her own good, she reluctantly nodded in agreement. Can we meet at the same place? There was silence on her end, and he quickly backtracked. I mean, if you don't like it, we could change locations. There's a new tea house that opened in front of Qing University. There's no need. I'll be there in an hour, she interrupted. What difference did the place make? Besides, it was only for the time being for him to better explain himself. All right. I'll wait for you then. Xu Haiyang happily agreed before hanging up the phone. Jian Yun thought for a moment before she headed into the bedroom to look for Wu Wenjing. Finally. You're finally getting the closure you deserve. Wu Wenjing nodded in approval, apparently overhearing her call with him. Before her friend could even ask for the car, she stood up from her bed and fixed her hair. I'll go with you, just to prevent that bastard from making a move on you, so he better keeps those grubby hands to himself. Snorting, she grabbed her keys and set off. She didn't refuse, and the two of them raced out the doorstep together. Wu Wenjing had bought a car on loan last year, a Peugeot 408. However, she definitely wasn't the best driver on the roadmap, given her hot temper and aggressiveness, so she didn't drive around that much. But seeing as her best friend needed her, she decided to suck it up and take the wheel. Besides, Jianyun wasn't in the right mind to drive, given her distractedness. Since there wasn't any traffic, the two of them had arrived at Qing University 45 minutes later. After registering at the security office, they drove their car right into the premises. Being alumni, they had every right to go in and out, so the registration of their names didn't really take that long. As Jianyun peered across the campus, she noticed that there weren't any people crowding about the yard, probably because it was still the weekend. This guy is really a jerk, Yun, Wu Wenjing murmured along the way. It's been 6 years, and suddenly he comes popping up asking you to meet at your usual place? The nerve of this guy. Jianyun simply sneered in response. Once they had finally parked by the road, she stepped out of the car and walked over, her flats pressed against the thick layer of grass as she strode towards the paved pathways. Her eyes were narrowed, and her cheeks were flushed as she stood under the harsh winds and cold air. Despite this, she held her coat close to her chest and continued on. The place Shu Haiyan was talking about was a small garden located by the Twin Dragon Lake, where they frequently met up when they were still together. It had left so many sweet memories for them, one that had softened her heart over the years. However, now that she had taken it all in, all she could feel was ridicule and mockery. This was only proof that his proclamations of love were nothing but a lie. Yunduo. Before Jianyun could even reach the outskirts of the lake, she heard a soft call from far away. Her back stiffened and her arms lay limp to her sides. Suddenly, it felt as if reality had smacked her across her face, and as she overlooked the smooth waters and peaceful night, she felt as if she was transported back to when she was still a young woman. Who would have thought that she'd hear his voice after all these years? Turning towards the direction of his voice, she spotted a suited man not far away from her. He gazed at her in surprise, looking as if he was caught off guard by her appearance. The man was tall, with around a height of 180 centimeters. With his handsome appearance and elegant figure, he still looked the same as he had been 6 years ago. In fact, even if she hated to admit it, he looked even more handsome than he had been. While Huo Liancheng was intimidating, this man held a more easygoing aura, one that made everyone comfortable at first glance. He walked towards Jianyun. The dim light circled around him like a halo, making it seem as if he had just descended from the skies above. She had never thought that she'd be seeing him again under these circumstances, and as she stared at him, she found herself frozen to place. Her heart ached at the sight, and her fingers twitched. It didn't feel that long ago, when she had let him caress her face and entangled his fingers in her hair. Although she looked calm and impassive, her heart was in deep turmoil. It was because she had loved him that she hated him so much now. Yunduo, you're here? Shu Haiyan didn't remove his gaze from her. It seemed that Jianyun wasn't the only one who was encaptured by the other's appearance. Even he felt that she had grown more beautiful throughout the 6 years. The passion inside of him had been ignited as he nervously stepped closer towards her. Don't call me that. Eyes flashing, she took a step back, maintaining the distance between them. She met his gaze as she struggled to suppress her own emotions. I'm here now, aren't I? Tell me why you're looking for me. You still remember this place, he commented, refusing to answer her question. Does that mean you still haven't forgotten about me? Jianyun snorted. That's right, how could I forget you? The guy who practically humiliated me in front of everyone. I definitely couldn't forget you that easily. Yunduo, I'm sorry. His expression immediately dimmed. Shu Haiyan wanted to grab her hand and pull her towards him, but she immediately took a step back. Withdrawing his arm, a bitter smile slipped into his lips. I really didn't know what happened to me back then. It was like I was being possessed by a ghost. I really didn't mean it. Possessed? She blinked. If that's the explanation you wanted to give me, then you've wasted my time. No, it's actually... Shu Haiyan hesitated, pausing. What? Jianyun clenched her fists, wanting nothing more than to punch herself. How stupid did he think she was? On the way here, she had actually been expecting a better explanation, something that could grant her the closure that she needed to step out from this cycle of heartbreak. And now, all he could give her was that he was in some sort of trance. Was that really all she was worth? Please, can you just trust me? Shu Haiyan suddenly rushed over, pulling her into a hug. He whispered in her ear, I love you, and I haven't forgotten about you in the past 6 years. Can you give me another chance? The moment his arms wrapped around her waist, something inside her had snapped totally.